So excited to have Drew Houston here. Very well-known figure amongst kind of our team out here. And for those who are maybe watching this video later, founder of Dropbox. How many billions of people do you have using? I know it's more like hundreds of millions only.
300 million.
Only 300 million people using it. File sharing. We'll talk more about that. But the way I view these things, it's definitely for our team to kind of meet and talk to really interesting people in Silicon Valley and beyond. But also for kind of just the general Khan Academy user base out there to kind of get exposure to really interesting people in Silicon Valley and beyond. And with that lens, I always think of kind of myself when I was 12 or 13 years old, and when I used to watch like Johnny Carson, and I always used to wonder like, who are these people? How did they do that? Like, what did I have to like major in order to become that person? And so I kind of want to have a little bit of that lens. So I'll start there. When you were a kid, what did you see yourself doing or becoming, and how did you try to set that up?
So my path started when I was really little. So my parents had a PC Junior. So the very first computer when I was really little. And my dad, so first I would just play computer games on it, but a couple years later my dad showed me how there's this thing on the computer called BASIC. And so I was lucky they showed me how to write some of my first lines of code when I was like really, really little.
Like how little?
I was 5.
That's good.
Yeah.
My son has to get in line.
And so as you can imagine, and it turns out when you're little like that, you have a lot of free time on your hands. And so I was always like playing on the computer, and I really loved playing games. And so that was actually why I wanted to learn programming, is to learn how to make games, how these things worked, and like in sort of my exploration of how the computer worked, I would figure out like there's like this, there's like files, and like okay, then when I save a game, like I can go into that file and like give myself like 32,767 lives, like so like it would be all these little things like that.
And if only I could access this file from home and kindergarten.
Moving this floppy drive around, yeah. So I thought I was going to make computer games. That was what I that was what I was interested in the beginning. Then as far as a job, I started out babysitting.
Really?
So I was very good at like watching. I was like 12, maybe 11, and like the parents would leave. I put the kids to bed. And I was very good at watching like HBO and like this is like a requirement. I could only like babysit for like families that had like good TV and like Pringles and things like that.
And they didn't view that as a red flag. That your focal point was their cable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then like trying to and then sometimes I'd be like watching something probably like shouldn't be watching. There'd be like shooting or like bad words, and I was very good at like listening for when the key went in the lock when the parents got home. Anyway, this has nothing to do with starting a company, but
sometimes.
But then I got a little bit of an upgrade on the job front. I was beta testing a game, and an online game. I was maybe 14, and they were taking forever to build the game, and so I started getting restless and curious and started poking around under the hood of this game, and I found all these security holes. So I found all these vulnerabilities, and at first you discover these things. You're like, oh my god. I started impersonating like the developers and things like that, and sort of making a little bit of trouble. But then I'm like, I send them an email. I'm like, guys, you should fix this. You should fix this, and you shouldn't have done this way. You should have done it this way. And I'm like, really getting into it. And they're like, well, do you want to work here? Yeah. And so I ended up working remotely as an engineer. Or like, do you want to fix those bugs? And I'm like, okay. And then, it was the first kind of startup adventure, first experience of many where my stock options were worth nothing.
Yes.
And
this is 14 years old.
14
years old.
And so it was part-time, remote, but it was like a cool thing to talk about in like biology class, and I had to get my dad to sign all the employment paperwork and things like that. So, but that was the path. So I was literally working on a game. But then, fortunately, as you learn, there's a lot of other things in life beyond like Unreal Tournament, which are really interesting.
Beyond what?
Unreal Tournament or StarCraft
Oh,
or Quake.
Unreal Tournament, yes.
Yeah.
I was like, what's Unreal? Okay. And so...
That was a little later on. Like PC era is like more of like the Sierra games, like King's
Yes.
Quest 4, something like that. You guys weren't born
for
yet.
me it was Pong.
Okay.
Yeah, that was. I'm a little
All
older.
right. We're losing them.
No, sorry, I'm a little bit. We have a little overlap. And then you go to MIT. We have, many of us have been there as well. And I watched your commencement speech. I watched your commencement speech, which was great. It helped that the guy before you really set a new low in terms of commencement speech quality. But your speech was really, I thought, a really powerful speech. And I think it kind of hit this issue of like, you didn't plan on being, Drew Houston Dropbox founder, but you did think you were going to be an entrepreneur. I mean, it seems like while you were in college, you were constantly thinking about starting a business of some kind.
Yeah, so, and your speech was great too. I mean,
I wasn't fishing for that.
No, but it was.
It feels good though.
You're sort of like, there's no instruction manual for these things. I'm like, what am I supposed? You just start like Googling excessively for like every commencement speech ever given before. Anyway, but no, I did plan to be. I always was excited about doing something that was my own thing, whether I was making a computer game or eventually as I learned more about business and starting a company. It just turned out that I had joined startups as an engineer or like an intern when I was little, and then just never really left.
And did you keep doing that while you were in college? I mean, you already had that kind of experience. So were you starting stuff? Like even your freshman year, sophomore year, were you doing stuff?
So the game company unfortunately folded pretty quickly, but that then gave me that experience and let me get a job at a local company. That was another startup. Actually, but it was kind of an MIT founders, so there's kind of a relation there. But yeah, in the summers I would take classes, and then every summer I would go work at. First couple of years, it was the company that I worked at in high school. So they were like maybe half hour outside of Boston.
Yeah. And the one thing that I think is mysterious for everyone, and even sometimes when people ask me, I don't have a clear answer because it's still a little bit mysterious, is, how do you stumble on this thing that, just kind of takes off like wildfire, that just, and you have an interesting story. I mean, you actually started kind of a little bit closer to kind of what we do here. Kind of your first startup, which I think you started your junior year, was around SAT. It was called Accolade.
Right. So you never know where these things are going to go, because I mean, I think anybody who grows up programming or whether it's programming or something else, like there's always tinkering with things. There's always just one project after another. And then the first time I wanted to start a company, I took my junior year off from MIT. So I took a year leave, which ended up being like a really great experience. And I promised my parents I would come back, and I did. But so the SAT at the time was changed. There was like all this change happening, right? They're merging in the writing section. It's going from 1,600 points from 1,600 to 2,400. Now I know there's all kinds of other stuff happening. But this was back in the day where, to study for the SAT, you'd have to show up at some like horrible classroom at like 8 in the morning on a Saturday to listen to some like 17-year-old who didn't want to be there either and was just reading out of a book. Like this was the state of the art in like SAT prep. And we're like, guys, like the internet, it's not like the internet's been here for like a little while. It's like it's been here for a long time. Like why are we still, this is like how my parents studied for the SAT. And so I teamed up with actually one of my former teachers from my high school, and we started building a new kind of course, or an online course for the what was then the new SAT.
And what's your lesson? I mean, what caused you to, I guess, not do that at some point? I mean, you worked on it for some time. You did.
It was interesting. So I started working on it because I'm like, here's like an opportunity. Here's something that my co-founder and I knew really well. I mean, I don't know. I treated the SAT. Like one of the things I really like to do is like reverse engineer like how things work, take things apart. So whether that's more typical stuff like the kind of tinkering that kids do, or like one of my or the finding all the security problems in that game. When I started working on the SAT, or had to study for it, I was like, how does this thing work? And so you can, as you know, there are all these like little tricks and little patterns you can take advantage of. And I'm like, okay, the really hard thing about the verbal section is the vocab, because like in general, you can teach someone how to do a sentence completion without even really teaching them. It's the words that are hard. So when I was 16, I wrote all this software to do kind of flashcards and adapt and remember which ones I was getting right and which ones I was getting wrong and things like that. Because I was too lazy to like cut out all the paper flashcards, and I'm like, this is so stupid. And so I'd done that, and that code actually was kind of on the shelf for 5 years, and then when the SAT changed, and I had a friend of mine who was a teacher who had his own SAT course, and then we had this whole shtick going. Like I was at MIT, he had graduated from Harvard, like, as a result of all this like reverse engineering of the SAT and studying a lot for, I got a 1600. So I was like, we had all like the boxes checked for the parents, and we're like, we know how this works. So it was really just seeing an opportunity and being like, you don't attach too much of an outcome around it. Like I didn't have a goal of like, oh, I need to make this much money or whatever. It was just sort of like another interesting project, and probably the best part of it was really just having an excuse to learn about business in like a rigorous way. So, and what I mean in a rigorous way, I mean like, I didn't know anything about sales or marketing or finance or like any of these subjects, and they all seem very like remote and mysterious. And so to combat this, I would just go on Amazon and type in like sales, and then like find like the top 3 rated or most popular sales books and just like read them and repeat that.
And you found that valuable.
And it's super useful. Like reading is like probably the most important. Reading about business is probably the most important thing that's prepared me for running Dropbox.
And then what was and you talk a little bit about it in your commencement speech, but I find this transition is kind of the most interesting one. Is what you were working on this for 2 years, I think, through your graduation. What kind of, it's hard. It's you're told to persevere and keep working on something. Don't give up. But at some point, maybe you are kind of putting good time after bad.
Yeah. So it was super interesting in the beginning because like, and when you first get to work, you get down to such important orders of business of like, all right, I got to Photoshop a logo and print out business cards that say founder on them and other very important things, and then hand them out to people so that they know that I'm a founder now. It's like this is like the stuff you.
Oh, I still do that.
Yeah. But then, what you realize is after that kind of, after you're like incorporated and you get your like fax back from the Delaware Secretary of State, and these things all seem very official and important, after you're like day number 74 of like, I got to take out the trash, like, we got to erase the whiteboard and like all this. It's like, you're like, actually, this is just a lot of work. It was good. But, so I think with my first company, neither of us knew what we were doing at all. And so we were bootstrapping it. It was just a lot of kind of manual labor around, like we were too cheap to get like, employees, and we weren't making any money. So, who's going to write the math questions? It was like me, and I just still remember having to like force myself to like write these math questions and draw these diagrams and be like, all right, so where did the train leave from last time? Okay, so this train leaves, Sacramento, and so I'm like, God, at some point I'm just like, I can't do this anymore.
We have people who do that, so it's actually quite fun to do that. Seriously, I find that, I do.
And so, but to, I feel your pain. The problem wasn't really the work. It was just more like we were putting a lot of effort into it and not seeing a lot of return. So it was for me. It wasn't, it's kind of lost some of the variety of the work, and so I just got kind of, it just became harder and harder. I felt like I had to push myself like so much, I'm like, it became something I dreaded. It became something where I'd have to like trick myself into like making progress, and I'm like, and then I'd start like, it's this like negative spiral, right? Because you're like, you start resenting the work, you start getting mad at yourself because you're like, why am I not more disciplined? You're like, why, and it's just like, then which makes you resent it even more and thinks there's something wrong with yourself. It's like all this stuff in your head, and And then what happened was I had a friend of mine who started a company and did things a little bit more properly. Like he had a co-founder who he was like really good friends with. They raised money. You know, they could just set up the company like a good, normal company, and then they were just having a blast. They were working like just every waking hour, but like they were just having fun like every minute. This is what it looked like and felt like. And so I was like, at first I'm like, oh man, maybe I'm really defective. Like, look, these guys are having no problem with this. But then what happened was I would find these little side projects, and I started working on a poker bot. Again, reverse engineering, like figuring, people said this isn't possible. I'm like, it is possible. And so I was really good at the security and kind of reverse engineering part of it, and could do enough of the AI. But, you know, and it was like this, I was just possessed. Like I would be like dragging my computers around everywhere. Like my parents would ask, like had me come up to New Hampshire because we have like a little place, like this place on a lake where you're like supposed to get away from technology. You know, next thing I'm like putting like 3 monitors on like the kitchen stove because there's not enough room, and like working on this thing. And so, but it turned out, I mean, you never know how these things are sort of all line up. But then when I was still working on the SAT prep company, and my friend Adam, who I mentioned, moved out to San Francisco, and next thing I know, he's 2 years younger than me, but you know, next phone call I get from him, he's like, hey, I've raised $5 million. And like, I was like, that's a lot of money. Like that number has like 2 commas in it. Like what the hell? And this is like my, you know, my little brother in our fraternity. And I'm like, oh my God. And so, but it just turned out that, you know, in part it was sort of the setup was there. Like I really loved algorithms and distributed systems, and I studied computer science. And like these are my favorite things. And so it was sort of fertile ground. And then, you know, one time I left my thumb drive at home, and so I couldn't get any work done for my company. And the sort of non-PR, like the director's cut version of sort of the Dropbox origin story, you know, so I was taking a ride on the Chinatown bus, the Fenghua from Boston to New York. Oh, wow. And I left my thumb drive behind, and I'm just like, I'm like, you know, what do you do in these situations? And you're not like, oh, I hate my thumb drive. I'm like, oh, I hate myself. Like I'm so like stupid. I'm so disorganized. Like I keep doing this. Why can't I be better? And you know, just the self-flagellation. And that's like, there's nothing else to do for like 4.5 hours. But I had this 3 gigabyte Linux virtual machine image that I need to keep in sync across all these computers, because I had worked on a laptop sometimes a desktop, sometimes another computer, and like nothing. There were a million things that claimed to solve this problem, and none of them actually did. And so it was really personal frustration that led me to open up the editor and start writing some code that eventually turned into Dropbox, although I had no idea that would be the case at the time.
And you know, I mean, I think this is an important moment because you know, a lot of times when you read about Dropbox, you say, oh yeah, he had the idea of having, you know, sharing files across multiple devices and all of that. But you know, whenever I realize, like, no, what's amazing isn't the idea is actually a very old idea. In fact, you know, almost anyone who's worked on data storage or anything has, for the last 40 years, has been trying to do this. Yeah. And so, to me, the power of, or almost the audacity of what you were, is like, this was like a big problem that a lot of really smart people had kind of tried to do, as you mentioned, maybe they even launched companies on it, didn't have really complete solutions. What was kind of going on in your head that convinced you that, no, like, I think the path that I'm about to take on this problem is going to be the one that works?
Well, it was just so clear from trying all the other things that, like, there were like 100 things that claimed to solve this on paper, but in practice, they never really worked. And there were, you know, at school, at MIT, they have, you know, sometimes you have like a campus network or a sort of hardcore Unix-y kind of way of solving this problem, but like for a Windows computer or like a MacBook, like there's just, you know, you're stuck carrying around a thumb drive and emailing yourself stuff, and that was, your point, it was more just amplified the frustration. I'm like, guys, this is not a new idea. We've thought about this since like the 60s.
Right.
Like, why the hell am I forced to do that? Like, it like really made me upset. And then you know, there's some conviction. I was like, look, you know, the problem with like all the online drives is like these very specific technical things where it's like, you know, it's all a big hack where the way the online drive, the iDrives and X drives, and for every letter there's been a drive. For all of them, they all worked on the same basic principle, which was like, okay, we're gonna trick your applications and operating system into thinking that instead of like when a program writes something to the disk, instead of writing it to the disk inside the laptop, it actually intercepts it, sends it over to the internet to a server somewhere, and gets it back. So at first glance, you're like, this is a great idea. We'll work with everything. It's, it's not that hard. But the problem is, like if the server is 100 milliseconds away instead of 5 milliseconds away, like your hard drive or less, then you get all these inexplicable problems because like millions and millions and millions of lines of code are all written with the assumption that this thing is like 5-10 milliseconds away. And I'm going into detail on this example, but it's like there's like no way you can ever make that work. Like, it's just like laws of physics. And so you need a completely different approach, and sort of a hybrid where like, okay, you have big and cheap and fast storage locally and on a server, but it's like two swimming pools connected by a straw, right? And so use the straw well, and two, like make it so that you're not waiting for the swimming pool to make it back and forth. Like, use it efficiently, do that in the background, syncing, right? So, and then it just turned out no one had gotten the technical part right, but then there's also like there's like a design piece of like, how do you design the interface? How do you make this, what's a metaphor that people can understand? And then there's like an academic piece of it, which is like the algorithms and how do you move the files around and things like that and store them. But then there's like a lot of grungy kind of operating systems work, where how do you make it so that you work the FAT32 file system. Every other file system, when it stores, next to the name of the file, it stores like when the file was modified, and it's a timestamp and it's a resolution of 1 second. It's actually more detailed than that, but I'm just listen. And then like just randomly on some random operating system, some random hard drive, you can have a FAT32 file system that stores that modification time with a resolution of 2 seconds. And it's like none of the other ones do that, but that one does, and so like, this adds all this weird complexity to the code, or like Windows XP Service Pack 3. There'd be bugs where like the Swedish version of that, not the Norwegian version, the Swedish version of this, like it would just like cause Dropbox to crash. Yeah. And so so it's two things. Like one is a fundamentally different approach from what some of the other guys are doing, and then two is a lot of just like that kind of obsession. Like the same way I was like obsessed with like making a very well crafted like SAT question about quadrilaterals and making the diagram look like the actual. It was like then obsessing over making it really fast and reliable and fixing that obscure bug with Swedish Windows.
And when did you realize, you start on this, you see a problem, you start tackling it, and it is an audacious problem to tackle. When did you say, this is real, this is like, I have a solution here, like this is already better than what's out there in industry?
So first was when I just made something that worked for myself. I'm like, I could actually use it. Like I would save something and it would like show up on my other computer and I'd be like, finally. And then, but it really started to take shape once I made a demo video of Dropbox, like a 3-minute little, it's still online somewhere, or you can find it. And I put it on Hacker News, which is this news site for startups. And it just got a ton of, it was like top of Hacker News for like 2 days. Like these were the old days, so it was easier to do that. But that gave me like a ton of, I'd already decided to quit my job, it was complicated. So I just graduated. I was working as an engineer at a startup, and I was moonlighting on my SAT prep thing. Yeah. That was the other thing. So you're asking why did I kind of get frustrated? And it's like my co-founder wasn't going to quit his job. I wasn't really either. This thing was never really going to succeed, but it also wasn't going to die. So like it just got kind of frustrating. But anyway, so Dropbox really, the first real turning point was when I put the video up, and then Arash, my co-founder, saw it on Hacker News. Like we got that later, like a week later, we got introduced through a mutual friend. So I got a co-founder from it, Paul Graham, Arash, my co-founder, and then our first investor, Paul Graham, saw the video and emailed me saying, because I just applied solo to Y Combinator with the idea, and so that's when
this was your second interaction with Paul Graham.
I had a complicated series of interactions before. So Paul, so Y Combinator is kind of like applying to college, right? Lots of people want to get in, not enough spots. You have this very competitive dynamic. And so actually the sort of admission system was how I thought about getting into Y Combinator. And so I'd actually flown out to California to hang out with some other Y Combinator founders. And I also wanted to pitch Paul on Dropbox. And so I showed up at Y Combinator a little early before one of the dinners and walked into his office and asked if if I could show him Dropbox, and he was very angry about that. He did not. The visitors were not. But that first video was like huge in terms of getting started.
Yeah, and then you get started, and I mean, and this, what year was this? Was 2007?
2007.
2007, and then it's just been kind of. Oh, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen it. I mean, you guys have got to be one of the fastest growing organizations, maybe in the history of the Valley.
Oh, so it's been growing quickly. I don't. They're all like, people are setting all kinds of records these days, but the company in terms of headcount has grown really fast, and then the user base has grown from 2009 we're like 1 million users, now we're over 300.
And I mean, given to where we're like, what are your kind of in hindsight, or now that you can look over the last 7 years? I mean, what have been, and I almost view this, and we were talking a little bit about this before we did this, is what's kind of your what would you have told yourself when if it was an 80-person organization or a 90-person organization, that to kind of like either ease your stress or let you know that something's coming, or ways to manage it as you grow?
Well, I think there's a lot, and it's hard to kind of boil it down to like pithy like phrases of like, oh, this is how you build a company. It's like, how do you play basketball? Like, well, it would take a while to explain, right? So, but I think I don't really know how to play. I'm not very good at basketball,
no.
so.
I am, but
okay,
I'm not. No, I'm kidding. I'm horrible.
Dude, all right. So what I would say is some of the earliest and most helpful advice that we got was really to focus on the people we brought into the company. Like, make sure everybody's like really, really talented. Like, that's probably the best like hack you can do to make everything else easier, right? Because put a good person between you and all your problems, right? And our angel investors and some of our early folks were like, just kept drilling that into our heads. Like, make sure the talent bar is really high, be very choosy. And then I think just sort of an attitude of really trying to systematically train to like understand, like, okay, well, here's what I'm dealing with today, but I'm going to talk to people who are maybe 6 months ahead, a year ahead, 5 years ahead, and like, what are they dealing with? Like, what would they? I asked this question. I was talking to another CEO, 8,000 person company. I'm like, all right, we're approaching 1,000 people at Dropbox. What am I gonna see between 1,000 and 2,000? What should I watch out for? Like, what would you put in place now, so that as you've done all these things and grown the company, what do you wish you could do today? So a lot of what I do is sort of think about that, and sort of you have to be able to see around corners, and one way to do that is reading. One way to do that is having mentors and getting advice. And then the other thing that gives you some calm is that what you read on TechCrunch or in the press generally, when someone tells a story of a company, they're like, oh yeah, no, Dropbox, it started out with not a lot of users, then later they had a lot of users and they did great. And they just have this narrative arc that you're like, well, the real truth is like, this complicated stuff happened, and this was actually really hard. They're like, yeah, no, okay, two MIT kids in a dorm room have an idea. They just, and so the truth is like, it's actually very complicated and hard, but that all kind of gets glossed over. But when you read like profiles, there's a lot of books that have been written about, lately the Everything Store is a book about Amazon. It's a great book. Steve Jobs biography, Google, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, all these, Intel, like Oracle. Like, I've read as many kind of profiles on tech companies and other companies as I could get my hands on over these companies over the last few decades. And what you learn is that there's nothing once you sort of look behind the curtain, there's nothing that's that magical. And so and that's important for people to understand, because you might think like, oh, I don't know anything about business, so I should just go like, I'm never going to be good at it because I've never been good at it, and that's just something that I should go get like a business guy or a person like to do that stuff, because I'll never be good at it. But it's actually something you can learn, and so I think that mindset of like, in a week you're probably limited in terms of what you can do, but like think about playing an instrument or becoming a doctor, like any of these things. It's like all of us can realize like, yeah, it's a lot of work, but I can sort of see a path from A to B. Turns out like most things that you want to learn have that kind of potential. Like, you can, whether it's public speaking or building a company or any of those things, like if you have the attitude that like, that, and you give yourself time, like, you can actually pick these things up. There's nothing that magical about them. So, and that's one thing from these profiles. And then the other thing Because you see in the early days, they make all these like really crazy, stupid mistakes and like do all these things that are like really, really wrong. And then that's also therapeutic, is like you realize all these companies were like a total mess. And actually, I see Albert in the corner. Albert was an early Dropboxer. Albert can tell you what a mess early Dropbox was. And so what you read about is actually not reflective of reality. It's a much messier and kind of less glamorous process.
Yeah. And I'm about to go into some questions from the team, but just my last question is, where do you see kind of Dropbox in 5, 10, 50 years? At the end of your life, what do you hope Dropbox has done?
50 years. I don't know if anybody's made like self-driving boats yet, but
that would be an innovation.
I mean, but in the you can't really look that far out. But what we've realized and what we talk a lot about is we have this opportunity where now we have a lot of resources, a lot of really talented people. We can solve these really big problems, and what we're really working on is building this home for everybody's most important stuff. Right? Because you think about your house 20 years ago, like you'd walk into your house, there'd be like, mail on the table. You'd go in your living room, your photos are on your, or in your kitchen, your photos are on your refrigerator, right? And you go down the hall and your briefcase has like your documents in, like all that stuff is now on servers or in your Dropbox. And so we need this like new kind of home. So we think all the time about like, how can we save hundreds of millions of people from like these things that are really painful and annoying about technology, like all these little paper cuts, like forgetting your like the equivalent of like these little thumb drive problems are like everywhere, right? And so how do we find the biggest ones and solve them at massive scale? And then specifically, we started out with this app that you put on your computer or your phone that gives you this like Dropbox folder. But really, what you want is, what you're using that folder for is often you're putting photos in there, you're getting work done, you're collaborating with other people, and so we're starting to dig into some of those use cases a little more with things like we just launched a photo app called Carousel, which is like if the gallery on your phone had like every picture you've ever taken, and if you could text like 100 or 1,000 photos and videos at a time, that's what Carousel lets you do. For some reason that had not really existed, or no one, like everybody has this problem, just no one solved it.
Yeah, awesome. So I'll go into some of these questions. So the first one, this is from Marcia. You can raise your hand, Marcia. Where's Marcia? I don't know. Where is Marcia? Oh, she's remotely. So what's your typical workday like?
Probably the biggest thing I spend time on is recruiting. And so there's, often there'll be some kind of fire drill at night where it's like, okay, we're acquiring a company, or there's some candidate and we're fighting with, Google or some startup to try to get them, there's a tug of war. So like, and like I'm often, finding myself down here, like going big game hunting for people to join Dropbox. So I'll be like in the Google campus, or if you see me in one of these companies, you know what I'm doing. And so recruiting is the biggest thing, and then a lot of probably the next biggest thing is just meetings in small numbers with people on my team around certain projects. So every 6 months we pick like a dozen things that we really want to get, that are really important that we want to get done, and then I'll be spending time with them, being like, okay, here's new stuff we're going to do in collaboration, or here's answering questions like that. What is Dropbox? Like, what should it be in 5 years? What will it be in 50 years? Like, what kind of place do we want to create? And so, it kind of, and then there's this much longer tail of all kinds of other stuff, whether it's like partners or customers or, just other things.
Yeah.
It's a hard question to answer succinctly.
Yeah, no, that's pretty good. Sometimes you show up at the Khan Academy.
I made something that downloads my Google Calendar I wrote a Python script that downloads my Google Calendar into an Excel spreadsheet and like triages my time.
Automatically?
Well, it's not. It's supervised. You have to triage the stuff, or have someone help you triage the stuff. But then I had these like rolling charts of like how I spent the last week, or the last 4 weeks, or the last 12 weeks, so that I can. Because a lot of people say like,
that's
"Oh,
a product. I'll use that.
All right,
That's interesting. You can get a little data analytics on your time. That's good.
It is. It's super important. So I did that more. Like one of the most important things you need to think about, like as your job gets more complicated and there's just more stuff competing for your time, it's really important to understand where it goes. There's a book called The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker. It's like any book on management will like focus on that. So But there's another thing. It's like no one's created a tool where you can see where your time goes. And it's like everybody, a lot of people have that problem. But anyway, so I have been at times very rigorous about that.
Very cool. And so I have a question from Dylan. Dylan's right over there. So what are some of the most interesting, unexpected, fun technical challenges that you and your team have faced in the process of scaling Dropbox to hundreds of millions of users?
So I think it's just fundamentally the challenge of Dropbox itself. I mean, we're building, we're trying to build like the file system for the internet. And so how do you connect, a billion devices, right? And so that comes along with all kinds of technical challenges where, people are saving 1 billion files every day on Dropbox. And so, that's more than there are tweets on Twitter. And this is not like little 140 characters. This is like your wedding photos,
pictures,
right?
Yeah.
So you can't have a bad day, right? So even just the core service, but then, as you branch out, then there's all these interesting things with, how do we make there's more sort of far afield things like computer vision, like how do we, for photos or something, how do we organize your photos for you, search, pretty much every kind of, we have like client software, we have big data, we have data science, we have, a bunch of infrastructure stuff, like every every possible platform, if people are really into hardcore algorithms, we need that. And if people are really deep into systems, we have an unlimited need for that. A bunch of storage stuff. I mean, it's really all over the map. It feels like any permutation of technical challenge, we have it, at least in software.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we have time maybe for one more. So this is from Joel. Where's Joel? There's Joel right there. So he'd like to hear about Hack Week, and this is we've had a little bit of it where we want to do more of this.
Yeah.
How did it get started, and what new stuff has come out of it? Has anything actually been productized? And
so Hack Week is basically something we do every year, where you guys have probably heard of a hackathon or a one-day hacking event, but we're like, all right, let's take this to 11. We'll do a whole week. And because sometimes, Dropbox, it would have been hard to prove that in a day, but actually the first prototype had something reasonably working in a week. And so it's something we do really to sort of get back to the spirit of where we started, where there are no constraints. A lot of people were telling us that what we were doing was, a lot of investors told me that Dropbox it's a stupid thing to get into, have yet another storage company where all the other ones have failed. But it just doesn't matter. Instead of talking or debating, actually write code and just and if you do it right, you can change how people think. And so a ton of things have made it into the product, from having a personal and business account in Dropbox. That was a huge project that started out as a Hack Week project. One of my Hack Week projects was the new, the way you do notifications, or the menu bar in Dropbox is not the native menu. You can see what's changed and have a different UI around that. Things like a bunch of security stuff. So two-factor authentication was something that started there. A lot of how you can rewind your files or undo things. That was a Hack Week project. And then a lot of other stuff which maybe didn't make it one-to-one, or make it pound for pound into the product, but even just when we watch people build all these apps on top of Dropbox, that informed, someone made a jukebox kind of music player as a separate app, and it just sort of plants a seed that may manifest itself years later in something oh, well, now instead of just having the Dropbox app, you have a whole family of apps, like Carousel, Mailbox, Dropbox. So it's really just a time for just to work on anything except what you're supposed to be working on. B, kind of unleash people and remember lift the constraints of day to day. And 3, it's to change how people think about, if you have an idea, prove it. And what you learn is people have a lot of really, it's a pretty amazing group of people we have in the company. And we had interns take Dropbox and put it in a weather balloon and put an Android phone into space, where this phone would be taking pictures of the ride up and down. And so it was just crazy. You just have this pictures uploading to Dropbox of space.
Well, I just want to thank you. I think I think I speak for everyone here that it's been a real treat to kind of get to know you just now. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks. Awesome. Thank you.